Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami namatu acharyasa. So this next section is called Speaking from the Heart. Given Ajahn Sumedho's celebrity and his growing proficiency in Thai, it was natural that Wat Pah Pong's lay supporters would be eager to hear him give a Dhamma talk. 4 years after his arrival, Luang Por decided that the time had arrived for his first Western disciple to begin a new kind of training, that of expounding the Dhamma. The opportunity arose during a trip to a branch monastery. As evening approached, a large number of lay supporters started to file into the monastery to participate in the evening chanting period and to listen to a Dhamma talk from Luang Por. With no prior warning, Luang Por asked Ajahn Sumedho to give the talk. The prospect of ascending the monastery's Dhamma seat and struggling to give an extemporary address to a large audience in a language in which he was not particularly fluent was an intimidating one. Ajahn Sumedho froze and declined as politely but firmly as he could. But with his strong trust in Luang Por and the realization that he was merely postponing the inevitable, he began to reconcile himself to the idea that soon he would have to start teaching. When Luang Por, quote-unquote, invited him to give a talk on the next observance day, he acquiesced in silence. Despite being well aware of Luang Por's view that Dhamma talks should not be planned in advance, Ajahn Sumedho felt insecure. At the time, he was reading a book on Buddhist cosmology and reflecting on the relationship between different realms of existence and psychological states. He made some notes for the coming talk. Observance day soon came and Ajahn Sumedho gave the talk. Although his vocabulary was still quite rudimentary and his accent shaky, it seemed to go down well. He felt relieved and proud of himself. Throughout the next day, lay people and monks came up to him to express their appreciation of a fine talk, and he looked forward to basking in the sun of his teacher's praise. But on paying respects to Luang Por beneath his kuti and seeing his expressionless face, he felt a chill go through his heart. In a quiet voice, Luang Por said, "Don't ever do that again." Ajahn Sumedho realized that Luang Por knew that he had thought the talk out beforehand and that, in his eyes, although it had been an intelligent, interesting, and informative discourse, it was not the Dhamma speaking. It was merely thoughts and cleverness. The fact that it was, quote-unquote, a good talk was not the point. In order to develop the right attitude towards giving Dhamma talks, a monk needs to guard his mind against the desire for praise and appreciation, and he must develop a thick skin. One night, Ajahn Sumedho was asked by Luang Por to give a discourse to the lay people with an unusual condition. It must last for 3 hours. After about an hour, he had exhausted his initial subject and began to ramble, hunting with increasing desperation for things to talk about. He paused, repeated himself, and embarked on long meandering asides, painfully aware of members of his audience getting bored and restless, dozing, walking out. Just a few dedicated elderly women sat there throughout the whole 3 hours, slumped, eyes closed, like gnarled trees on a blasted plain. Ajahn Sumedho reflected after it was all over. It was a valuable experience for me. I began to realize that what Luang Por wanted me to do was to be able to look at this self-consciousness, the posing, the pride, the conceit, the grumbling, the laziness, the not wanting to be bothered, the wanting to please, the wanting to entertain, the wanting to get approval. Turn and face the strange. Ajahn Sumedho was the only Western monk at Wat Pah Pong for 4 years until, in 1971, 2 more American monks arrived to spend the Rains Retreat. One of them, Dr. Douglas Burns, was a psychologist based in Bangkok who intended to be a monk for the duration of the retreat. The other was Jack Kornfield, Venerable Sunyo, who, after practicing in monasteries throughout Thailand and Burma, was to return to lay life and become one of the most influential teachers in the American Vipassana movement. Neither monk stayed at Wat Pah Pong very long, but both exerted a strong influence on future developments. At the end of his short period in the robes, Dr. Burns returned to Bangkok, where he would recommend Westerners interested in becoming monks to go to live with Luang Por. A number of the first generation of monks came to Ubon following such a referral. In the months that Jack Kornfield was with Luang Por, he made assiduous notes of the teachings that he received and later printed them as the very popular Fragments of a Teaching and Notes from a Session of Questions and Answers. Subsequently, as Kornfield's own reputation spread in America, his frequent references to Luang Por introduced Luang Por's name to a Western audience. This acquaintance was strengthened by A Still Forest Pool, a collection of Luang Por's teachings which Kornfield co-authored with another ex-monk, Paul Breiter, formerly Venerable Voropanyo. Luang Por's charisma and his ability to move and inspire his Western disciples soon became well known. But if Luang Por was the main reason Wat Pah Pong became the most popular Thai forest monastery for Westerners seeking to make a long-term commitment to monastic life, Ajahn Sumedho's presence was often a deciding factor. Here was someone who had proved it could be done. He had lived a number of years in trying conditions with no other Western companions and had obviously gained much from the practice. He was a translator and a mentor. And although he resisted the evolution, he was also becoming a teacher in his own right. Venerable Voropanyo arrived in Wat Pah Pong at a time when Luang Por was away for a few days. His meeting with Ajahn Sumedho was crucial to his decision to stay. This is a quote. "Sitting up there on the porch in the peace of the forest night, I felt that here was a place beyond the suffering and confusion of the world. The Vietnam War, the meaninglessness of life in America and everywhere else, the pain and desperation of those I had met on the road in Europe and Asia who were so sincerely looking for a better way of life but not finding it. This man in this place seemed to have found it, and it seemed entirely possible that others could as well." In 1972, the Sangha of Western monks was steadily increasing, and Luang Por decided that they should spend the Rains Retreat at Tam Sang Pet, a branch monastery perched on a steep hill overlooking a flat Isan countryside, about 100 kilometers to the north of Wat Pah Pong. Away from the guiding influence of Luang Por, personality conflicts festered, and a burned-out Ajahn Sumedho left at the end of the retreat. This is a quote. "To begin with, I felt a lot of resentment about taking responsibility. On a personal level, the last thing I wanted to do was be with other Western monks. I was adjusted to living with Thai monks and to feeling at ease within this structure and culture. And yet there was an increasing number of Westerners coming through. Dr. Burns and Jack Kornfield had been encouraging people to come. After the Western Sangha had this horrendous rains retreat at Tam Sang Pet, I ran away. Spent the rains in a monastery in the southeast and then went to India. But while I was there, I had a really powerful heart-opening experience. I kept thinking of Luang Por and how I'd run away, and I felt a great feeling of gratitude to him, and I decided that I would go back and serve. It was very idealistic. I'll just give myself to Luang Por, anything he wants me to do. We'd just opened this horrible branch monastery at Suan Kluai, down on the Cambodian border, and nobody wanted to go and stay there. I'd gone for a katina ceremony and been taller than all the trees. So in India, I thought I'd volunteer to go and take over Suan Kluai. I had this romantic image of myself. Of course, when I got back, Luang Por refused to send me there, and by the end of the year, there were so many Westerners at Wat Pah Pong that he asked me to translate for them. Basically, I trusted him because he was the one pushing me into things that I wouldn't have done by myself. Through Western eyes, beginnings. The question which every Western monk would get asked sooner or later, and usually sooner, was why he chose to become a monk. It was often a more difficult question to answer than might be expected. It wasn't so easy to distinguish causes from triggers, or to be sure that an uplifting narrative was not being patched together with hindsight. Monks usually settled on recounting the events leading up to their decision and their departure to Thailand. There was, for instance, Pabakro, an American helicopter pilot who first came to the country on R&R during the Vietnam War. There were the Peace Corps volunteers and the young travelers backpacking through Asia, like the Canadians, Nyanadhammo and Viradhammo. There were also those like the British Brahmavamso and the Australian Nyanadhammo, who came with the express intention of becoming monks. Many started off by reading books. The first generation, when books on Theravada Buddhism were hard to find, were inspired by the works of Alan Watts, Charles Luke, and D.T. Suzuki. Later generations arrived having read translated works of Luang Por Chah, books by Ajahn Sumedho, or American Vipassana teachers. Some were seeking to deepen and stabilize the lucid calm they had experienced on 7 or 10-day meditation retreats. Others were inspired by their contact with Buddhist monks while traveling around Thailand. One amongst the latter was Ajahn Sucitto. He recounts the effect of seeing monks on alms round. One early morning, sitting in a cafe, I saw monks from a local monastery walking on alms round. They were in a line, barefoot in the dusty road, walking towards me. The rising sun glowed through their brown robes. Each monk had only a simple alms bowl with them, and their faces were serene and gentle. Their walking was calm and unhurried. They were not going anywhere. They were just walking. The weight of years of self-importance lifted off my heart. Something soared within me like a bird at dawn. But for the disciples of Luang Por, it was almost invariably his presence and example that inspired them to stay and take the leap into monastic life. Or, if they were already ordained, to make a long-term commitment to the Wat Pah Pong training. For most, the first meeting with him, although outwardly inconsequential, was momentous and life-changing. Some monks spoke of a sense of relief, as if they had finally found a place and a teacher they didn't want to leave. As Ajahn Nyanadhammo squatted down respectfully, hands in Anjali, Luang Por walked over to him and, without speaking, took his hands in his own. It's a quote. I felt the shock and joy and a weight fall from my shoulders. I didn't realize until after he'd gone how much suffering I had been carrying around with me. One of the richest sources of anecdotes concerning Luang Por and his Western disciples is to be found in the writings of Paul Breiter. Breiter arrived in Wat Pah Pong in 1972, and, as Venerable Waropanyo, struggled gamely through 5 years of monastic training before disrobing and returning to his native United States. In 1993, his memoir of the years he spent with Luang Por, Venerable Father, was printed in Bangkok. It begins with words that struck a chord with many of his contemporaries. If I have ever loved anybody in my life, then it is Luang Por Chah. Venerable Waраpanyo's first meeting with Luang Por took place in Bangkok. I was overwhelmed by his radiant, exuberant happiness. I had really never seen anyone like that. He seemed like a big, happy frog sitting on his lily pad, and I thought, if all you have to do to be like that is sit in the forest for 30 years, it's worth it. I remember how my spirits were lifted then. In the car going back to the Wat, I was thinking, there's hope. The practice of meditation and the Buddhist monk's way of life, both of which I found so difficult, much more difficult than anything I had ever done, thought of doing, or heard of anyone else doing, can produce results. Seeing a living example was worth more than reading any number of books. Ajahn Brahmawangso, a monk with a rigorous scientific background, decided to take Luang Por as his teacher after having his rational mind confounded. He recalls that shortly after his arrival in the Wat, while listening to Luang Por teaching another Western monk, he mentally formulated his own question. As soon as he'd done so, Luang Por spoke words that seemed to answer his query directly, more so than that of the apparent questioner. Assuming it was probably a coincidence, he formulated another question, which was also promptly answered. This occurred again and again. Not all of the foreign monks at Wat Pah Pong were from Western countries. Ajahn Sucitto, for instance, was from northern Japan. After a period mountaineering in Nepal, he had devoted himself to learning yoga in India before visa difficulties forced him to leave for Thailand. For him, inspiration first arose from his impression of the monastery itself and what it suggested about the abbot. I arrived at the Wat just as the monks were leaving an alms round. I was very impressed to see them walking in a line, composed and restrained. I couldn't take my eyes away from them. It was such a beautiful sight, something I'd never seen before. I walked into the Wat, and the path was neat and clean and pleasant to walk along. There were no branches or leaves littering the path. It impressed me even more. I thought the abbot must be very good. He must have a very strict discipline. Ajahn Sucitto's lay name had been Shibahashi. Luang Por found it impossible to pronounce and dubbed him Sibat Hasip, which means 4 baht 50. That means like $4.50 or something. He inspired the young man by explaining how an inner search, a search for the end of suffering, was more valuable than an outer search. Unless he knew how to abandon negative mental states, climbing mountains was a waste of time. This inner search and training lay at the heart of monastic life. 4 baht 50 decided to stay. Some 15 years later, when Luang Por was bedridden, Ajahn Sucitto became one of the stalwarts of the nursing shifts. Above all, he was motivated by gratitude. He said that he felt that, however much he did, he would never be able to repay even a small part of the debt he owed his teacher. This is a quote. I felt as if he gave me new life. He was like mother and father to me. He gave me so many things. It was like I was slowly sinking into quicksand, just about to be swallowed. And he pulled me out and saved my life. The young Australian musician, who was later to become Ajahn Puriso, was struck by the contrast between Wat Pah Pong and other temples. The somber colored robes of the monks, their composure as they went about their duties, their aloofness, the sense that something meaningful was going on. It's a quote. I was told I could stay in the Dhamma hall, informed where to find a pillow and a blanket, and then left to myself. The eerie Pali Thai chanting I heard that night was totally beyond my mind's grasp. I couldn't even figure out if it sounded good or just strange. But the sight of the monks in the great dark hall, lit with only a few candles, squatting immobile on their toes as they chanted for more than 30 minutes, was truly awe-inspiring. Ajahn Pasanno, abbot of Wat Pah Pong for over 10 years, and now abbot of Abhayagiri Forest Monastery in Northern California, first came to Wat Pah Pong as a visiting monk, after having entered the Sangha in Bangkok. His thoughts echo those of Ajahn Sumedho. An abiding impression I gained of the way of life at Wat Pah Pong was that this was something that you could live over a long time, whereas at the places I had practiced meditation before, it was a matter of applying a particular technique in a kuti in a special section of a monastery. It wasn't something that could be lived. Wat Pah Pong opened up a new dimension for me. That sense of being able to make a long-term commitment to a teacher, a training, and the Vinaya. What struck me very strongly was the thought that if you're going to lead the holy life for any length of time and reap benefits from it, then you would need to keep the Vinaya, to have an integrated lifestyle of Dhamma Vinaya practice. Luang Por really understood very clearly how completely we need to restructure our perceptions and every aspect of our conditioning. So his way of teaching was not just a meditation technique, but a complete training of body, speech, and mind. That was really the hallmark, his emphasis, what I feel was special about him. After a period of probation as a visiting monk, Akanduka, Ajahn Pasanno was fully accepted into the Wat Pah Pong community. I remember looking forward to being able to participate in the Patimokkha and getting quite excited. When the bell was rung, I was very eager and immediately made my way to the Uposatha hall. Luang Por didn't show up for another hour and a half. He was over in the Mechi section giving them a talk. And I had a lot of trouble sitting on the hard floor. We hadn't even started the Patimokkha, and I was already squirming. Luang Por came and chatted back and forth with various monks, and then we performed the Patimokkha. Afterwards, about 10 p.m., he started to give a discourse. And that went on until almost 3 o'clock in the morning, when he looked over innocently at the clock and said, "Maybe you'd better ring the bell for morning chanting." Then Luang Por walked into the Dhamma hall to give a short talk to the lay people, and we went to have a drink. The kettles of sweet drinks had been standing there since the previous evening and were full of ants. I must confess that quickly dampened my enthusiasm for Patimokkha. So leave it there.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami.
Out of curiosity, on those 5-hour-long Dhamma talks, were there consistent themes he would return to, or would he just?
Could be anything. And also, a lot of, though I had no idea what he was talking about. The level of language comprehension was so minimal that I basically had no idea.
Both Luang Por Pasanno and yourself yesterday sort of mentioned your reluctance to live with Westerners, with Western monks. And I spent just a little bit of time in Thailand, just a little bit of time with Thai monks, but I sometimes found it difficult and frustrating being in an environment with Thai monks. And I was wondering just about, did things change, or how things changed, or what about Westerners did you not like, or?
I just found them irritating and opinionated. It was, it was just something that I found living with Thais very. I mean, they were. Thais are used to living in community and living in close quarters, and I just found it the amount of opinions and views that I reacted to, and also that level of kind of bumping up against each other or competition. I just found that irritating.
Seems like the great masters of like the Buddhist tradition. It seems like they emphasize a lot on self-reliance, and just relying on oneself to be discerning, be anything.
Yes, and yes and no, in the sense that self-reliance, but also taking on a teacher and a training as a foundation. Because yes, you're self-reliant, but also you've got to have some kind of parameters and guidelines for that, so that, it's one of the reasons why, the Buddha taught a lot about self-reliance and seeing for oneself, but then he also said that, having good spiritual friends is the whole of the holy life. Ananda says, it's half the holy life to have good spiritual friendships, and the Buddha said, it's not half the holy life; it's the whole of the holy life. So that those are in juxtaposition and work together. So it's not, it's just self-reliant and the sort of the idea of especially in terms of the American sense, just be independent and free but usually that is just bound up by one's own limitations and own particular biases, so that there's a juxtaposition that is there, the emphasis on self-reliance, but then also that sense of paying attention to what are the good examples and models that one can rely on for that self-reliance. Because one creates a refuge within oneself that is solid and independent, but it isn't uninformed by the people and refuges around one. It's an interesting juxtaposition. I think it's really important as a part of our training, our ongoing training. It's like in the 10 subjects for frequent recollection for one gone forth. That is there. Can't remember how the phrasing of it, but is there anything that I've done that I feel that I should be embarrassed by, but then there's also the next one is also, is there anything that my friends in the holy life would criticize me for? So I'd say those are, yes, we're self-reliant and we have to pay attention. Okay, what does it feel that I've done inappropriately or unskillfully, and really take responsibility for that. But then also, what do my friends in the holy life. What do they say about my conduct or my actions or my way of living? So those are they're a necessary balance.
I know we've perhaps asked a question relevant to this before, but with recollections of Tit Goisiko in the book, and also what you're sort of saying now about this balance between seclusion and also self-reliance and community and these other things which keep someone in the holy life. I'm curious with these the monastics which you grew up with, who did meet Luang Por Chah and obviously had great zeal and faith, and some of who disrobed after a few years, or some of who disrobed after 20 or 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any reflections on what caused that, and what did that balance get off kilter, or is there something we should be reflecting on?
I would say, well, it's you can't ever really know what goes on in somebody else's mind. So what I say is my opinion. But so to my perspective, I think in many cases people have ended up isolated from their peers and isolated from their from having maybe like peer-to-peer relationship, communication. Use Ajahn Sucitto as a good example. I think the more famous and well-known he became, the more isolated he became within his own community and the larger community, so that he was not really having, and more and more involved with lay people. That's oftentimes can be the case. A lot of involvement with lay people, and then that sort of separation from the roots of the community and the holy life. That's to me that certainly as one becomes it's a danger as one becomes more of in positions of leadership or responsibility, teaching. One becomes a teacher of other people and isn't teaching oneself, or being open to hearing teachings from others.
It's probably a lot of benefit then, like the Wat Pah Pong Sangha meetings in that regard, like the way the elders still get together.
Yeah, it's quite unique, really. It's really wonderful sometimes sitting around with the old guard, and they've known each other for so long, and the way they how comfortable they are with each other, and how they tease each other, and it's quite. I remember on more than one occasion, sort of going back and spending time just hanging out and around, out at the outer sala at Wat Pah Pong, or underneath Luang Por Liam's kuti, and you're just sitting around, drinking tea and coffee and chatting, and many of the older monks around, and it's just this quite hilarious sometimes. They're really funny, and they tease each other and enjoy each other's company. Or when somebody is sort of there's monks who are start to have they start to have a following, and start to have and monks will it'll be mentioned to say, be careful, or don't let it go to your head. Yes, again, in the suttas, some of the strongest language and the strongest, most vivid images that the Buddha uses are in the Samyutta Nikaya, the Labha Samyutta. There's gain, honor, and fame in Buddhism. These are a danger.